To create a new administrator account that will be stored directly on the firewall itself, go to Device, Administrators, and click Add. I'll create an example for a new administrator named John, and the actual username that I'll use is admin John. For an account stored locally on the firewall, I could leave the authentication profile set to none, but we'll also look at creating and using entries in the firewall's local database a bit later. The entries for password and confirm password obviously have to match. For administrator type, I can choose either dynamic or role-based. Dynamic administrator types are built-in, pre-configured roles provided by Palo Alto Networks. If I choose role-based administrator type, I can choose from a few pre-configured roles, or I can build and then select a set of custom permissions that I want this user to have. I would have to build those admin roles separately before I could select one here. For this example, I'm going to stick with dynamic and super user. The password profile allows me to define and then select settings which govern how complex passwords have to be, how often they have to be changed, and other items related to administrator passwords. For this example, I'll simply leave the password profile set to none. When I click OK and commit the changes, the new account will be in place. The firewall contains a local database, which allows you to add entries for either firewall administrators or for users who need to be authenticated by the firewall, for example, users authenticated by Captive Portal. Adding an account to the database is done under Device, Local User Database, Users. Then click Add. And for this, I'll create a new entry for Sally Admin. For password, I can enter and confirm the password here. If I select password hash, I can then paste in the hashed value. This is something that could commonly be used if I want to reuse the password from a Linux account, but I only have the hash and not the clear text password. I'll leave this set to password. When I click OK, the new entry is created in the local user database. Creating administrator accounts in the firewall's local user database is preferable to simply creating an administrator and setting the authentication profile to none, like we did for the admin John account. With administrator accounts in the local database, I can then create an authentication profile that instructs the firewall to look at the local database to check administrators' credentials when they attempt to log in. Authentication profiles tell the firewall what service it should use to verify a user's credentials. You can build different authentication profiles under Device, Authentication Profile. If I want the firewall to authenticate administrators using the local database, I need to create an authentication profile specifically for that. When I click Add under the Authentication tab, I need to supply a name for this authentication profile. Since I'm going to build this to use the local database, I'll enter local DB. For type, I can choose from the different types of services that the firewall could use to verify administrator credentials. For this example, I'll choose local database. We'll look at some of the other options like LDAP and Radius a bit later. For this example, I don't need to make any modifications to user domain, username modifier, or single sign-on. If my organization uses multi-factor authentication, I can use this tab to specify which MFA factors to use. Under the Advanced tab, I have to instruct the firewall which account groups or individual accounts are allowed to authenticate. In this case, I'll select all. When I click OK, I have the new local database authentication profile in place. The next step in the process is to create a new administrator account and instruct the firewall to verify the credentials against the local DB authentication profile that I created. I do this under Device, Administrators. I click Add, and I enter the name of the account. In this case, because I created Sally Admin, I will use that account from the local database. For authentication profile, instead of leaving it to none, I'll select the local DB authentication profile that I created. Notice that I no longer need to supply a password for this account. The password has been stored in the local database, and that's referenced by the local DB authentication profile. For administrator type, I'll choose Dynamic and leave this account set to Superuser. When I click OK and commit my changes to the firewall, the account for Sally Admin will be in place. I'll now log out and then log back in with the Sally Admin account. I'll close the welcome window, and the firewall has allowed the admin Sally account to log in. I can check the system logs to see the process. I'll use a filter to look only at authentication events, and we can see that the Sally Admin account was authenticated against the local DB authentication profile.